There's a version of you that only seems to appear after the lights go out. The room is quiet. Your phone is finally face down. The day is over. And just as you are about to fall asleep, your mind opens a door you never consciously walked toward. Suddenly, you are somewhere else. Maybe you are standing in front of a crowd, delivering a speech so perfectly that the room falls silent. Maybe you are finally telling someone exactly what you should have said years ago. Maybe you are proving everyone wrong. Or maybe you are simply sitting across from someone who finally understands you. The conversation feels real. The emotions feel real. Sometimes you replay the same scene over and over. You change one sentence. You imagine a different response. You fix the ending. Then, somewhere between one more revision and another imaginary conversation, you drift off to sleep. If that sounds familiar, you are far from alone. Most people have experienced some version of this. But very few stop to ask why it happens. At first glance, it seems like ordinary daydreaming. A harmless habit, something your brain does while waiting for sleep. But psychologists believe something much deeper is happening beneath those quiet nighttime stories, because these scenes almost never happen by accident. Notice what they're usually about: recognition, closure, confidence, being understood, saying the thing you couldn't say in real life, or becoming the version of yourself that always seemed just slightly out of reach. Those themes repeat because they matter. Your brain rarely spends energy rehearsing emotions it doesn't care about. Every recurring scene points towards something that still feels unfinished. And that is where things become fascinating. The moments before sleep are psychologically unique. Researchers describe this transition into sleep as a period where logical thinking slowly becomes quieter while emotional processing remains highly active. Your body is preparing for rest. Your emotions are preparing for processing. That is why thoughts you barely noticed all day suddenly become impossible to ignore. The awkward conversation. The opportunity you missed. The compliment you wished someone had given. The apology you never received. The version of yourself that felt just a little braver than the one who actually showed up. During the day, responsibilities keep those emotions occupied. At night, they quietly return. Not because your brain wants to torture you, because it hasn't finished with them yet. Humans naturally organize life through stories. We don't simply remember events. We immediately ask ourselves what those events mean. What they say about who we are. Whether we succeeded. Whether we failed. Every experience becomes another chapter in an internal narrative. The problem is that real life rarely provides satisfying endings. People interrupt, arguments end too quickly. Relationships change without explanation. Important conversations never happen. You move on externally. But internally, the story remains unfinished. Your brain doesn't like unfinished stories. So when everything becomes quiet enough, it opens them again. Not to escape reality, to continue writing it. This is why your nighttime imagination often feels surprisingly detailed. The dialogue sounds natural. The setting feels familiar. You know exactly where everyone is standing. You are emotionally editing. You are experimenting with different versions of yourself. What if I had spoken? What if I had stayed? What if I stopped apologizing for taking up space? Those aren't random questions. They're identity questions. Psychologists have long argued that identity isn't something we simply discover. It is something we continually build. Every difficult experience forces us to quietly answer one question. What kind of person am I? Sometimes the answer feels incomplete. Your imagination steps in to continue the conversation. One of the psychologists who spent decades studying this was Jerome Singer. His research on constructive daydreaming found something surprising. People with rich inner worlds often perform better in creativity, emotional regulation, and problem solving. Their imagination isn't replacing reality. It is helping organize it. That is an important distinction, because people often feel embarrassed by these elaborate inner movies. They assume they're wasting time. They wonder if something is wrong with them. But having a vivid internal world isn't automatically avoidance. Sometimes it is emotional rehearsal. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is your brain trying to make sense of experiences that daily life never fully resolved. Of course, not every nighttime story feels hopeful. Some are painful. Some replay arguments you lost. Some imagine conversations you are afraid are coming. Some rehearse worst-case scenarios over and over. Others revisit people you've already lost. One more conversation. One more goodbye. One more chance to say everything that never found words. But they serve an important purpose too. Sleep researchers know that emotional memories become especially active before and during sleep. Your nervous system isn't randomly producing sadness. It is surfacing emotions that still need processing. Sometimes the story feels like proof you are stuck. In reality, it may be part of how you eventually move forward. There is another pattern psychologists have noticed. People with especially detailed inner worlds often grew up in environments where expressing emotions wasn't always easy. Maybe feelings weren't discussed, maybe vulnerability felt uncomfortable. Maybe there simply wasn't room for difficult conversations, so the conversations continued somewhere else, inside. The imagination became a private place where honesty finally had permission to exist. You couldn't say what you were feeling out loud, so you said it silently, night after night, year after year. Eventually that private world became incredibly rich. Not because you wanted to escape life, because part of your emotional life had nowhere else to go. That changes a person. It creates an inner landscape that is often far more detailed than anyone around them realizes, which also explains something surprisingly funny. Your imaginary self is often remarkably impressive, confident, calm, quick with the perfect response, always knowing exactly what to say. You cast yourself. You direct yourself. You write dialogue. Your real mouth could never deliver with such perfect timing, and maybe you've laughed at yourself for doing it. But beneath the comedy sits a serious question. Why does that version of you feel easier to access in private than in public? Modern life trains us to edit ourselves constantly. We monitor reactions. We soften opinions. We avoid saying too much. We carefully manage how we're perceived. Eventually the most honest version of ourselves only appears when nobody else is watching. Late at night, in silence, without an audience. But here is the interesting part. That version isn't fake. It is still you. Just without so many filters. That is why these stories matter. They reveal something deeper than fantasy. They reveal desire. Not the desire for fame, or money, or perfection. Usually something much quieter. The desire to feel understood. The desire to speak honestly. The desire to stop hiding. The desire to become fully yourself. Some people eventually become curious about that gap. Instead of asking, why do I imagine these things? They begin asking, what would happen if I acted a little more like that person tomorrow? Not dramatically, not perfectly, just slightly. Maybe speaking sooner, maybe expressing one honest thought. Maybe allowing themselves to be seen instead of endlessly rehearsed. The real world will always be messier than imagination. People interrupt, words come out wrong. Conversations don't follow scripts. But real experiences do something imagination never can. They create change. Imagined courage feels comforting. Real courage slowly transforms your life. That is why these nighttime stories shouldn't be dismissed. They're not simply entertainment. They're information. They quietly point toward the parts of yourself still waiting for permission. Permission to speak, permission to create. Permission to forgive. Permission to ask. Permission to become. So tonight, when the lights go out and another scene begins playing inside your mind, don't rush to stop it. Watch it carefully. Ask yourself one question. What is this story trying to tell me? Because underneath every imagined conversation, every rewritten ending, every impossible speech, and sometimes, the greatest purpose of imagination isn't escaping reality, it is gently showing you the life your heart has been trying to move toward all along.